The world had barely emerged from the devastation of the First World War when the seeds of an even greater conflict began to take root. The victors had promised that the Great War would be the war to end all wars. But the Treaty of Versailles, instead of bringing lasting peace, planted bitterness and resentment. Germany, humiliated by harsh reparations and territorial losses, nursed grievances that would soon be inflamed by dangerous voices promising revival. Italy, though on the winning side, felt cheated of its rewards and turned toward strongman leadership. Japan, seeking to expand its influence, grew restless under economic strain and the belief that it too deserved empire. Across the globe, the Great Depression crippled economies, toppled governments, and gave rise to extremists who thrived on fear, anger, and despair. Into this fragile world stepped Adolf Hitler in Germany, Benito Mussolini in Italy, and militarist generals in Japan, leaders who convinced millions that destiny demanded conquest and that greatness could only be restored through war. They were not alone in their ambitions. In many nations, old empires clung desperately to power while new movements called for change. The League of Nations, designed to mediate disputes and prevent war, proved powerless in the face of aggression. When Japan invaded Manchuria in 1931 and Italy invaded Ethiopia in 1935, the League could do little but protest. These failures emboldened aggressors and signaled to the world that treaties and diplomacy might not stand in the way of expansion. In Germany, Hitler remilitarized the Rhineland in 1936, violating the Versailles Treaty, yet the world looked on without action. Soon after, he annexed Austria in the Anschluss of 1938, welcomed by cheering crowds in Vienna. Then came the Sudetenland crisis, when Hitler demanded the German-speaking regions of Czechoslovakia. At Munich, Britain and France, desperate to avoid another war, chose appeasement, handing over the territory in exchange for promises of peace. Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain famously returned to London, declaring peace for our time, but within a year, Europe would be engulfed in flames. When Hitler invaded Poland on September 1, 1939, unleashing his strategy of Blitzkrieg lightning war combining tanks, aircraft, and rapid infantry movement, Britain and France finally drew the line. They declared war 2 days later. World War I had begun. Poland, however, stood little chance against the combined onslaught of German forces from the west and the Soviet Union from the east, following the secret clauses of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. By early October, Poland was crushed, divided between two ruthless powers, and the world realized that a new, more brutal war had arrived. The early months of the conflict saw a strange lull known as the Phony War on the Western Front. But in the spring of 1940, Germany struck with overwhelming force. Denmark and Norway fell quickly, giving Germany control of vital ports and resources. Then in May, Hitler turned west, unleashing Blitzkrieg on Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. Within weeks, German forces had bypassed the heavily fortified Maginot Line, encircled Allied troops, and forced a desperate evacuation from Dunkirk. Hundreds of thousands of British and French soldiers escaped across the Channel in a massive improvised rescue effort, but France itself fell soon after. By June, Paris was occupied, and the once mighty French Republic had surrendered. Hitler stood triumphant over Western Europe, his armies seemingly unstoppable. Yet one nation refused to bow. Britain, under the leadership of Winston Churchill, stood alone against Nazi domination. In the summer of 1940, Germany launched the Battle of Britain, seeking to gain air superiority in preparation for invasion. Waves of Luftwaffe bombers and fighters filled the skies, striking airfields, factories, and cities. But the Royal Air Force, outnumbered yet resolute, fought back with skill and courage. Radar technology, new at the time, gave the British a vital edge. After months of combat, Germany failed to break British defenses. The planned invasion, Operation Sea Lion, was abandoned. Hitler had suffered his first major defeat, and Churchill's words, "never in the field of human conflict," was so much owed by so many to so few captured the nation's gratitude to its pilots. Even as Britain endured the Blitz, nightly bombings that devastated London and other cities, the war was expanding. In 1941, Hitler turned east, launching Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history. On June 22, millions of German troops stormed across the Soviet frontier, driving deep into Russia. The attack shattered the Nazi-Soviet pact and opened the Eastern Front, a theater that would become the bloodiest of the war. At first, the Germans advanced rapidly, encircling vast Soviet armies and pushing toward Moscow. Yet the Soviet Union, under Joseph Stalin, refused to collapse. The harsh Russian winter, fierce resistance, and overstretched German supply lines slowed the advance. The Eastern Front became a brutal war of attrition, costing millions of lives. Meanwhile, in Asia, Japan pursued its dream of empire. Having already seized Manchuria, it waged war in China with devastating brutality, exemplified by the Nanjing Massacre. But Japan's ambitions reached further, toward Southeast Asia and the Pacific. In December 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on the U.S. naval base at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Hundreds of aircraft struck battleships and airfields, killing over 2,000 Americans and crippling the Pacific Fleet. The United States, until then officially neutral, was thrust into war. Within days, America declared war on Japan, and Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. The conflict had now become truly global. From 1942 onward, the tide began to turn. In the Pacific, American forces achieved a stunning victory at the Battle of Midway, sinking 4 Japanese aircraft carriers and halting Japan's expansion. On land, brutal fighting raged in North Africa, where British and Commonwealth forces clashed with the German Afrika Korps under General Erwin Rommel. At El Alamein, in late 1942, the Allies halted Rommel's advance, marking a turning point in the Desert War. Soon after, American and British forces landed in North Africa, beginning the long push to liberate Europe from the south. On the Eastern Front, the city of Stalingrad became the symbol of Soviet resistance. From 1942 to early 1943, German and Soviet troops fought street by street, building by building, in one of the most savage battles of the war. When the encircled German Sixth Army finally surrendered, it was a devastating blow to Hitler's ambitions. The Soviets seized the momentum, pushing westward in a relentless offensive. By 1944, the Allies prepared for the liberation of Western Europe. On June 6, D-Day, Allied forces launched Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in history. Tens of thousands of soldiers stormed the beaches of Normandy, facing deadly fire, but securing a foothold. Within weeks, the Allies broke through German defenses, liberated Paris, and advanced toward Germany. On the Eastern Front, the Red Army surged forward, reclaiming vast territories and approaching Berlin. Germany pressed from both east and west, fought desperately, but its fate was sealed. In April 1945, Soviet forces entered Berlin. Hitler, hiding in his bunker, took his own life as the city fell. On May 8, Germany surrendered unconditionally. In Europe, the war was over. Yet in the Pacific, the fighting continued. Japan, though battered by island-hopping campaigns that brought you sources closer to its shores, refused to surrender. Battles such as Iwo Jima and Okinawa were fought with ferocious resistance, causing enormous casualties on both sides. Faced with the prospect of a bloody invasion of the Japanese mainland, the United States made a fateful decision. In August 1945, atomic bombs were dropped on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The devastation was unlike anything the world had ever seen. Within days, Japan announced its surrender. On September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri, the formal surrender was signed. World War I had ended. The cost was staggering. Over 70 million people had perished, soldiers and civilians alike. Entire cities lay in ruins. Empires had collapsed, and the world was forever changed. The Holocaust, in which 6 million Jews were systematically murdered, along with millions of others deemed undesirable by the Nazi regime, revealed the depths of human cruelty. Trials at Nuremberg sought justice, holding Nazi leaders accountable for crimes against humanity. In the aftermath, the United Nations was created in the hope of preventing future global conflict. Yet the wartime alliance between the United States and the Soviet Union quickly gave way to rivalry, marking the beginning of the Cold War. Europe was divided, with the Western democracies under American influence and Eastern Europe under Soviet control. Colonies around the world moved toward independence, inspired in part by the weakness of old imperial powers and the rhetoric of freedom. The legacy of World War I is vast. It reshaped borders, destroyed and rebuilt economies, and ushered in an age of nuclear weapons and superpower rivalry. It left scars that remain visible in memory, politics, and culture. The war demonstrated both the darkest capacities of humanity and the resilience of those who fought for survival and liberty. It was a conflict that engulfed the globe, and its aftermath still defines the world we live in today.